Hello and welcome to the CyberScotland podcast. My name is John Callagy. I'm the Head of Community and Membership at the Scottish Business Resilience Centre. I'll be the host on today's podcast, and I'll hand over now to my two colleagues who will be joining me on the show.
Hi everyone, I'm Declan Doyle, Head of Ethical Hacking and Professional Services at SBRC.
Hi folks, I'm Jeremy. I'm the Lead Ethical Hacker at the SBRC.
Brilliant, thank you both. And we're going to jump straight into what this episode's about. It's about cyber strategy. It's something that's come up in the news a lot lately, and I think there's a need for a bit more clarity around what it is. So straight off the bat, what does cyber strategy mean?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to cybersecurity, we've been on the back pedal quite a lot. So it's usually an afterthought, or it has been, I guess, in the past. And what we're trying to do is make cyber not an afterthought, but a forethought. And I guess that's where the strategy comes in. So you want to build cybersecurity into everything you do. So cyber strategy is how you implement cybersecurity into your regular organisation's day-to-day.
Brilliant. Thank you. Jeremy, anything to add on top of that?
Yeah, I think like Declan says, it is really important to kind of try and develop your strategy preemptively. I think, unfortunately, especially in cyber, most of the thinking comes after a big incident when there's been lessons learned and people suddenly realise that, this is important because they've had some massive financial or operational impact to their organisation. So I think, just to echo what Declan says, doing this preemptively is really important.
Yeah, brilliant. One thing I notice in the news, we hear a lot about strategies from nations and not so much about businesses, but it sounds like from what you've both described it, that businesses really need to take on cyber strategy if they aren't already. Yeah,
so I think the way that we're thinking about things now is if you're a business or an organisation, if you have people working, you're going to consider their safety, things like is there a process for evacuating the building if there's a fire alarm, if they're lone working, there'll be policies around that. Anything that you would have to do with people, you usually need to have some sort of procedure in place. Nowadays, cyber's getting to that point as well, so you need to start thinking about it strategically. We're using that phrase, the cyber strategy, is you need to start thinking, how do you implement cyber to protect the people and just your organisation in general.
Mm-hmm. And are we talking enterprise level organisations? Are we talking SMEs? Are we talking public, private sector? What sort of organisation are we looking at here, Jeremy?
I think every kind of organisation. So everything from the NCSC publishes its National Cybersecurity Strategy every year, and that's looking at the entire country, how they can improve our resilience as a whole. But you could take that all the way down to the smallest charity might have a strategy to improve their cyber resilience by doing something as simple as installing a new firewall, a new antivirus, or doing staff training. So it really could apply to absolutely any organisation. Okay,
and I suppose looking at it, every organisation is quite different. How does it apply differently? Is it sort of one size fits all approach, or is there different techniques and approaches organisations should be looking to for their different sizes?
Yeah, so there's elements that are one size fits all. We talk about cybersecurity basics, and in other CyberScotland podcasts you'll have heard about some of the cyber hygiene that we use. So there's those elements, but there's also the kind of elements that are different depending on the size of your organisation. So for example, you mentioned big enterprises, they probably have cybersecurity teams internally that do a lot of their work, whereas smaller organisations may have external third-party providers, they may have IT providers, they may have cybersecurity providers. Depending on your makeup, there may be different things to consider. And so what we're doing is trying to have some advice and guidance on cyber strategy that focuses on the smaller side of organisations, because as we've mentioned, you've got organisations like the National Cybersecurity Centre who publish a lot of different advice and guidance, like the board toolkit, for example, great for kind of getting your board started on cybersecurity, but it is a one-size-fits-all document. So there's a lot of things that are great for your larger organisations, but maybe your smaller organisations, your charities, they're not really sure how they interpret it and how they use it, and that's where we're trying to fill a gap.
Okay. I'll come back to that. I had another question in relation to, from what you've both said, it's incredibly important now to start looking at this. It's for all organisations, public, private, third. Everyone has to be looking at this from the smallest startup to the biggest enterprise. Who should be looking at taking on responsibility for this in your organisation if it's not already something that someone is doing in the organisation?
So I think first and foremost, it's the responsibility of leadership, same as anything else. So it would be probably the board or the chief executive, the non-execs. But then also at an individual level, at a lower level, cybersecurity is the responsibility of everybody. You have a responsibility to report things if you see them, to be skeptical where you need to be, things like that. So while the overall responsibility, the accountability falls with leadership, I think it is the responsibility of everyone, and that's something that's really important to stress.
Yeah, we tell people that cyber is everyone's responsibility, but what is important in organisations is you're leading by example. So you have the leadership in your organisation, they need to be the ones that are saying, right everyone, cyber is all of our responsibility. So we as a management team, we as a leadership, we as a board, we're going to be showing you what we want the organisation to look like in terms of cyber security. So if they're leading by example, the organisation should hopefully follow.
I think we see some really good examples of that every day. For example, in like the phishing exercises that we do at the SBRC, where we're sending out mock phishing emails to companies. We've had a few cases where we've managed to phish to trick a director at a company, and they've put their hands up and they said, yeah, I got phished, but I did the right thing. I reported it immediately, and that's what you guys should do as well. It's leading by example. It's taking ownership of that, which I think is really important.
So let's imagine for a second that I'm in a position where I'm listening to this podcast. I need to start doing something with cyber strategy. Where do I turn? You mentioned some documents already, Declan. What am I supposed to do just to get the ball rolling with this?
Yeah, so there's a few places you can go. First of all, if you're looking at a background in cybersecurity, you're not really sure about cybersecurity at all, maybe check out some of the guides that are on the CyberScotland website. So the Introduction to Cybersecurity for Staff is a guide that has been on the CyberScotland website for a few months now, and it's a great place to go to kind of get that background information. When you think you're ready to start looking at strategy, you can visit the new guide that's coming out for like an introduction to cybersecurity strategy. And that's going to have hopefully all the information you're going to need to at least start your cybersecurity journey and your cyber strategy journey. And then when you think you're ready to take it up a level again, you could look at something like the board toolkit from the National Cybersecurity Centre's website, and that has quite a lot of questions and kind of prompts that you can take your board through or your kind of leadership team through. And then beyond that, there's various cyber exercises and things like that you can do to really put your leadership team through their paces.
Okay, brilliant. But give us a sneak peek. What's in it, Jeremy? How am I supposed to use it? What am I going to be looking forward to with this guide document?
Yeah, so what we're really trying to do with this is to help you identify the priorities, things you should do first as you're developing your cybersecurity. So we've got it broken down into short, medium and long-term considerations. So you can look at the things that are most important first, so the easy things that you can implement in the short term, things like multi-factor authentication and strong passwords, and those will protect you against the more opportunistic kind of attacks that people are generally just looking for financial gain. They're trying to hack you very quickly. They're not really targeting anyone in particular. And then as you go further on, you look into the medium and long term over a period of months and years, and that's looking more at protecting you against more targeted attacks, so doing things like staff training, and then also looking down in the certification route as well. So looking at Cyber Essentials Plus, and ISO 27001 as well. So to verify all the changes you've made previously.
Interesting. So this document it's extensive. It's quite a long one.
Definitely.
It can be a bit off-putting, I think, because there's 16, 17, close to 20 pages of information. You know, it covers a lot of information in this to a certain level to get you going, basically, and then there's sort of links to find more information on each piece of advice. And if I was a smaller organization, what should I do just to get, even just to focus on one area with this document? Just, I got it, I'm looking at it, I'm like, I don't have time for everything. Where do I look to start? Yeah,
so we've designed the document to, as Jeremy was saying, be kind of split up into short, medium and long term. So start with the short term. That's what you can do, if pretty much straight away, and that will make a big difference. We said earlier on about cyber hygiene, and that's been discussed in previous CyberScotland podcasts. That covers like the basics in cybersecurity, the fairly minimal effort things that make quite a huge difference. So that's definitely a place to start. The kind of ideology behind what we're doing is if you write down a task and you break it up into smaller parts, it makes the task easier to do. So don't think about cybersecurity and your cyber strategy as this huge thing that's going to take you years to implement. Break it down into the smaller things you can do. Look at what's manageable for your organisation and start there, because, as I say, those small differences make huge differences.
And we have produced this guide as a bit of a one-size-fits-all, but it does also vary based on your organisation as well and what you do. So if you're handling a lot of financial information, you're probably going to look far more at things like data protection and integrity. Whereas if you're not a customer-facing organisation at all, you might worry less about that and more about how you can continue doing your job in the event of an attack. So it very much varies based on what you do as well.
And what technical level do I need to be at to be able to understand this guide?
You don't need to have a technical level. So it's aimed at hopefully everyone. There are obviously going to be terms that are jargon, but we do explain what they are. Unfortunately, in cybersecurity, there are just terms like that. We're doing the best that we can to kind of demystify a lot of the jargon and mumbo jumbo in cybersecurity, but we are getting there. So pick up the document, and if there is anything that you're thinking is a bit unsure, maybe look at the introduction to staff, or introduction to cyber training for staff. That'll probably explain something if you're not sure about. But for the most part, should be everyone be able to pick up the document and at least take away something from it.
Brilliant, yeah, and I think it's a nice segue for what I was going to ask you about next. The sort of buzzwords, mumbo jumbo that you mentioned there. There's a lot going around at the minute with cyber strategy, and we've seen even NCSE use them in memes recently, which was an interesting social media approach. One that worked, it generated a lot of conversation.
Yep.
Two that I've seen mentioned, zero trust and defense in depth. If you wouldn't mind, just explain what they are in simple terms so that I'm not confused when I see another meme from NCSE.
Yeah, so I love some of these terms because they can be broken down into quite basic explanations, but again, they're kind of used in a way that makes it difficult to understand. But I often look back at something that the BBC put out during COVID. So we all remember COVID and what happened there.
Jeremy's shaking his head at the minute. He's laughing.
Jeremy laughs at this because I've told this story many times and people laugh when I tell it. But basically, in order to explain how we were going to combat the spread of the virus, there was a bunch of different things we did that were, in the 90 to 98% level of effectiveness, but nothing was 100% effective because you're not going to get, with fighting the pandemic, with cybersecurity, you're not going to get something that's 100% effective at protecting you. So each layer of defence, this is where you get the term defence in depth, is like a piece of Swiss cheese. So effectively, using the COVID analogy that the BBC were talking about, you had something like face masks, you had the vaccine, you had social distance, and each one of those was a layer of Swiss cheese. Yep. So there's a little bit of a hole in it, which means that if you were to shoot the particles, or I guess in cybersecurity it'd be the hackers at these layers, there's a chance they could get through. But if you stack them, then it gets harder and harder for them to break through. So think of it like layers of Swiss cheese. The chance that the hole's going to align, very difficult. And people get a good laugh when I tell that. And I usually put a couple of pictures of Swiss cheese on screen. Perfect if you're doing this presentation just before lunch, because everyone's like, oh, I'm really hungry now.
Nice. So Swiss cheese is what I think of.
But just think about it in that way, is just the more layers of kind of defence you have, the more layers to protect your organisation, the better protected it's going to be. And again, there is going to be that chance that all of the holes in the Swiss cheese align when you get a hacker in. That's just unfortunately the way we have to deal with cybersecurity, is you're never going to be that 100% safe. But just because you're never going to be 100% safe doesn't mean you can't manage that risk.
And that also means that there's no single point of failure as well. So if, say for example, your password gets leaked, then you've got multi-factor authentication, which is your second layer of the defense in depth. So there's no single point of failure. If one fails, it does not necessarily mean the hacker's going to be able to get in.
Yeah.
So I think, sorry John, you mentioned zero trust there as well. So that's kind of like the same idea, where it's effectively a fancy name for staff in your organisation only having the level of access that they need. So for example, if you have a finance team within your organisation, there's no real reason they should have access to maybe the sales department, their presentations, their data, things like that, and vice versa. If you work in HR, you probably don't need access to the finance information. So it's making sure that people don't have all this sort of access, because if you ever do get your account compromised, if a hacker manages to get access to your account, they can then go as far as they can to try and steal information. So just be aware of that. It's very common, actually. We see, particularly, we're talking about cyber strategy as leaders in organizations, chief executives, kind of board level. They want to have sight on everything. And whilst they can have sight on everything in a business sense, it maybe doesn't make sense for them to have sight on everything from an IT perspective. And so they don't need access to every single file in the organisation, because that means if a hacker gets access to their account, they've also got access to every single file, which can be pretty disastrous.
Okay, interesting. Thanks for that. The Swiss cheese. It's a good analogy. I can see why Jeremy was laughing now. But it sounds like both of these come back to what you were saying earlier with when I asked about the responsibilities, that it's essentially just getting everyone in the organisation up to a certain level with their skills and knowledge of cyber, so that the protection is across the board instead of having your IT department solely responsible for everything. So kind of just is coming back to that point, I guess. Yeah,
these days cyber is not just the IT person's job. It's not just the board's job, it's everyone's job.
Yeah.
But we want the boards, we want management, leaders to lead. And if they can lead by example with cyber, I'm sure everyone will follow.
We talk a lot about the lowest hanging fruit.
Yeah.
In terms of if you're just that little bit better than the next organisation, most of the opportunistic attackers are just going to move on.
Yeah.
So it's just about raising your entire organisation's cyber resilience up just that little bit more.
Okay. Fascinating. So there's quite a lot there to take in. There's a lot of different guides being mentioned. All sounds sounds relatively straightforward to dig your teeth in initially. But if I'm looking at these guides and I'm still a little bit confused, is there any way I can contact you guys through SBRC or anything? Find out more anywhere?
Absolutely. We're always here to help through SBRC. So just get in touch with us at sbrcentre.co.uk. Look at us up on the CyberScotland partnership, because we're a CyberScotland partner. So we'll be there and you can find us and reach out. We've got a lot of different projects on. Again, some of the CyberScotland podcasts, I'm sure I've covered these, but things like Exercise in a Box, great way to get you talking about cybersecurity within your organisation and actually having a discussion that can get you some meaningful answers, and as well questions that you want to go and find the answers to. Brilliant.
Well, all there's left for me to say is thanks so much, both of you, for taking the time to speak today on a subject that, had a lot of, I suppose, fog around it and wasn't quite clear, but I think you've kind of cut through it very well, explained everything with good analogies on Swiss cheese. You've given good pathways for further learning and stuff like that as well. So thank you very much. And for anyone listening, everything will be linked below so that you can find all the different guides that the two guys were on about. And just get in touch through CyberScotland or Scottish Business Resilience Centre for more information on anything mentioned, or if you just want to have a chat about cyber strategy or something else to do with cyber, please reach out. That's it. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll speak to you on the next episode.